November 1943, Mediterranean Sea, 02:13 hours, a narrow strait between dark coastal cliffs. The sea looked empty. Moonlight skimmed across low swells, broken only by the faint silhouettes of Allied patrol ships maintaining slow course along the channel. Visibility was poor. Land masses on either side narrowed the waterway into a corridor barely wide enough for maneuvering fleets. In earlier years of the war, a night like this would have favored surprise. But by late 1943, surprise had begun to change form. Inside the lead Allied destroyer, the radar operator watched the screen quietly. Then the scope bloomed. Multiple returns. Not scattered merchant vessels. A formation. Contact bearing 038, multiple ships. The officer of the watch leaned closer. How many? More than 4, maybe 6. Range closing fast. Somewhere beyond the darkness, an attacking naval group was pushing through the strait, likely expecting to encounter only scattered patrol craft. Their silhouettes were still invisible to the naked eye. But radar had already seen them. On the bridge, the destroyer captain made the decision quickly. If the enemy formation entered the narrowest part of the channel before being engaged, maneuvering space would vanish for both sides. But if fire began early, before the attackers even knew they were detected, the corridor would become a trap. Open fire on radar solution. The guns trained forward. No one could yet see the targets. At 02:16 hours, the first Allied salvo roared into darkness. Seconds later, the radar screen confirmed impact geometry, contacts slowing, one echo shifting erratically. From the attacking fleet's perspective, the battle had begun without warning. Shell splashes erupted out of empty night, bridges lit by sudden fire, officers scanning the horizon for ships that remained hidden beyond smoke and darkness. The second salvo followed immediately. Now flashes appeared on the horizon. Silhouettes emerged briefly, destroyers attempting to adjust course inside a confined waterway. But by the time the attackers understood they were under accurate fire, the Allied ships already had corrected range. The strait magnified every mistake. Turning too sharply risked collision with the coastline. Maintaining course meant sailing deeper into the gun envelope. Within 3 minutes, one attacking vessel was already trailing smoke. The battle had begun before anyone had seen the enemy. And it was moving far faster than traditional naval engagements. Because radar had erased the delay between detection and destruction. The first salvo landed before the attacking formation understood what was happening. Shells struck the water ahead of the lead ship, then corrected almost immediately. The second volley landed closer, too close to be coincidence. Inside the attacking fleet, confusion spread quickly. Night battles usually began with visual confirmation, silhouettes, signal lamps, muzzle flashes. Officers expected to see their enemy before being engaged with accuracy. But here the order was reversed. The attackers were being targeted precisely by ships they could barely see. The lead vessel attempted a defensive maneuver, swinging its bow sharply to port. In open water, this would have widened the engagement angle. Inside the strait, the maneuver only tightened the corridor. The next Allied salvo struck near the destroyer's forward section. Fire erupted along the deck. Its speed dropped noticeably. Behind it, the second ship in formation tried to compensate, increasing throttle to avoid collision. That adjustment created a perfect radar track. Allied fire control operators updated the solution instantly. Another volley. This time the impact landed midships. The attacking formation had entered the strait expecting to move quickly through darkness before defenders could react. Instead, the defenders had already calculated their movement. Every correction made by the attackers only improved the next firing solution. Within 3 minutes, the formation had lost its clean line. One ship slowing, another accelerating, a third attempting to turn wide without enough room. The narrow waterway began to compress their movement into overlapping arcs. And in naval combat, overlapping arcs become predictable. Predictable targets are easy to destroy. The attackers still had more ships and heavier guns. But the defenders had the advantage of timing. And timing had already stolen the first minutes of the battle. By 02:19 hours, the attacking formation faced a problem larger than damage. It faced geometry. The strait that had been chosen for concealment now limited maneuver. Ships attempting to turn away risked drifting toward rocky coastlines barely visible in darkness. Ships maintaining speed risked overtaking damaged vessels ahead. Meanwhile, the Allied destroyers continued firing steadily. Radar returned every course correction immediately. Each shell landing tightened the pressure. The lead ship, already burning forward, slowed drastically. Its reduced speed forced the following vessel to veer sharply starboard to avoid collision. That maneuver briefly exposed its full broadside. The Allied gunners seized the moment. 2 rapid salvos struck along the exposed hull. One shell detonated near the aft section, knocking out steering control. Now the attacking column had 2 crippled ships, obstructing the narrow approach. Smoke thickened over the water. Inside the formation, signal lamps flashed frantically. Captains attempted to relay course corrections to one another. But coordination at night depends on visibility. And visibility was collapsing. The third vessel attempted a desperate acceleration, trying to push past the damaged ships and regain initiative. It only carried the formation deeper into the radar envelope. Allied gunners corrected once more. Another hit. Another fire. By 02:22 hours, barely 6 minutes after the first shots were fired, 3 ships were damaged, and the attacking fleet had lost formation discipline. The defenders had not moved significantly. They did not need to. The attackers were navigating themselves into the kill zone. At 02:24 hours, the battle reached its decisive moment. The attacking fleet still had ships capable of fighting, but they no longer had formation. Radar showed scattered contacts instead of a single advancing line. Ships slowed to avoid wreckage. Others turned partially away to escape incoming fire. The narrow strait had become crowded with smoke, debris, and damaged hulls. For the Allied commanders, the objective had never been total destruction. It was interruption. If the attackers could be forced to break momentum inside the corridor, their advance would collapse on its own. That collapse was now visible. The remaining undamaged vessels attempted to return fire, but their gunners lacked stable targets. Allied ships were masked intermittently by darkness and smoke, while radar kept their firing solutions accurate. The attackers faced a brutal choice. Continue pushing forward through a congested channel under accurate radar fire, or disengage. By 02:27 hours, 11 minutes after the first shots were fired, the decision became clear. The attacking formation began turning away. One by one, surviving ships reversed course toward open water beyond the strait. The battle had lasted barely longer than a commercial radio broadcast. But the damage, physical and psychological, was enough. The offensive had stopped. Not after hours of exchange. Not after massive fleet engagement. But after 11 minutes of precise, radar-guided fire in a place where maneuvering space had run out. By 02:28 hours, the gunfire began to fade. Not because the Allied ships had exhausted ammunition, but because their targets were disappearing from the radar screen. the attacking formation was no longer advancing through the strait. It was leaving. Radar contacts that had once moved steadily south now turned northward, retreating the same way they had entered. Their speeds fluctuated as damaged ships struggled to keep pace with the rest of the formation. Smoke drifted slowly across the water. For the first time since the first salvo, the Allied gunners paused. The narrow channel was now scattered with wreckage and burning fuel. One damaged ship had come nearly to a stop, its superstructure silhouetted against flames rising from the deck. Another vessel limped away trailing smoke, steering erratically as it followed the retreating formation. Inside the Allied ships, the radar operators continued watching the screen carefully. Contacts were shrinking. The corridor was emptying. The entire exchange, from first detection to final withdrawal, had lasted barely longer than 11 minutes. Yet within those minutes, the attacking fleet had lost its advantage completely. The strait that had been chosen for concealment had instead forced the attackers into predictable movement. Once radar gave the defenders early detection, every maneuver the attackers made inside the confined waterway became easier to track. Accuracy multiplied. Time compressed. And by the time the attackers understood the trap, they were already withdrawing from it. When the engagement report reached Allied command later that morning, the timeline stood out immediately. Duration, 11 minutes. At first glance, it seemed improbable. Naval engagements normally unfolded gradually, ships sighting each other, maneuvering for position, exchanging fire over extended periods. Even brief destroyer actions rarely resolved so quickly. Yet radar logs confirmed the sequence precisely. Contact detected. First salvo fired. Formation disruption. Withdrawal. The speed of the battle had not been caused by overwhelming firepower alone. It had been caused by removing the delay between detection and engagement. In earlier years of the war, fleets often required visual confirmation before firing accurately. That delay allowed attackers to close distance or reposition. Radar eliminated that window. The defenders had begun firing while the attackers still believed they were concealed by darkness. By the time visual contact occurred, the battle had already progressed several steps. For the attacking fleet, the realization came too late. Their ships had entered a narrow strait assuming surprise would protect them. Instead, surprise had been reversed. And once the defenders began firing first, the confined waterway amplified every mistake. Command analysts summarized the lesson in a brief memorandum circulated afterward. In restricted waters, radar detection compresses engagement time to minutes. By sunrise, the Mediterranean had grown quiet again. Smoke still hung low over the strait, drifting slowly across the water where the battle had unfolded only hours earlier. Allied ships approached cautiously. In daylight, the results became clearer. One enemy vessel remained drifting near the center of the channel, its hull blackened and partially flooded. Another had escaped, but left a long trail of oil across the surface, marking its damaged retreat path. Debris floated across wide stretches of water, splintered wood, twisted metal, lifeboats released in haste. The attacking fleet had not been annihilated, but its advance had been broken. That had been the defenders' objective from the beginning. Prevent passage. Preserve the strait. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. The consequences would last much longer. Naval warfare had always depended on range, firepower, and maneuver. But by 1943, another factor had begun shaping outcomes more decisively. Time. Radar shortened the distance between detection and destruction. Where fleets once spent long minutes searching for one another in darkness, radar allowed defenders to open fire almost instantly. That compression changed the rhythm of battle. Attackers expecting stealth could suddenly find themselves under accurate fire before they even realized they had been seen. And when battles unfold in confined waters, reaction time becomes even shorter. Ships must maneuver carefully to avoid land or collision. Large vessels cannot turn quickly. Once formation breaks, recovery becomes difficult. The attackers in this engagement discovered that problem in real time. They had entered the strait assuming darkness would protect them. Instead, radar turned darkness into advantage for the defenders. The entire fleet had been forced to withdraw before it could fully deploy its strength. All because 11 minutes had been enough. Within weeks, the engagement was studied by naval planners across the Mediterranean theater. Not because of the scale of destruction, but because of the speed. If radar-equipped ships could break a formation within minutes in confined waters, then narrow passages were no longer reliable routes for stealth movement. Every strait, harbor entrance, and island channel became a potential radar trap. Ships that attempted surprise could instead become predictable targets. Commanders began adjusting tactics accordingly. Attacking formations moved more cautiously through restricted waters. Destroyers were assigned greater responsibility for radar screening. Night operations increasingly relied on electronic detection rather than visual scouting. The 11-minute battle had not destroyed a fleet, but it had changed how fleets approached the night. The naval battle that stopped an entire fleet lasted only 11 minutes. That brevity is what made it remarkable. For centuries, naval warfare had unfolded slowly. Ships sighted one another across open water, maneuvered for position, and exchanged fire over long periods. Darkness often delayed the beginning of combat. In the Mediterranean, in 1943, that delay disappeared. Radar turned detection into immediate engagement. The defenders did not wait to see their enemy. They fired the moment the radar screen revealed movement. Inside the narrow strait, the attacking fleet had little room to adapt. Ships attempting to maneuver only made their trajectories easier to track. Each correction improved the defenders' next shot. Each hit forced another maneuver, and every maneuver tightened the trap. The attackers were not defeated through overwhelming firepower. They were defeated through timing. 11 minutes had been enough to shatter their advance, disrupt their formation, and convince their commanders that continuing forward would invite disaster. The fleet turned away. The strait remained closed, and the battle became a quiet demonstration of a new reality of modern naval warfare. When detection becomes instant, war can be decided before ships even see each other. Sometimes the difference between victory and retreat is not the size of a fleet, but the 11 minutes it takes for radar to change the fight.